In this video, I want to show you some examples of good student work from past classes for the abstract assignment. So for this assignment, I want you to think about what you've learned about the elements of composition and go out into the world and see if you can make photographs that emphasize elements of composition rather than the thing itself. That is, I want you to try to eliminate the context, try to focus on the texture, line, form, space, and color of these images, and draw our eye to what things look like rather than what things are. So you're looking at a contact sheet by a student from a couple of semesters ago, and I love looking at the contact sheets of successful versions of this assignment because you can see it really looks more like pattern and design than it does like photography. So the student really had fun getting up close to raindrops, to leaves, and really exploring line, color, texture, and a little bit of form. Let me show you the ones that they selected to turn in. I just love this. One of the great examples of success in an abstract assignment is when the first question you have is, you're like, what am I looking at? That's so cool. But if you're not quite sure what it is, the photographer has succeeded in showing you something very different or very surprising about often a very ordinary object. So this is raindrops on the hood of a car. Very ordinary thing, very extraordinary in this photograph. Same thing here, this beautiful close-up of a leaf. Might be a little bit more recognizable to us, but still, our first thing that we look at and recognize is the color, the line, the form, rather than saying, oh, I'm looking at a palm leaf. There's another one. And one thing I want you to notice is, even though now these are all very successful versions of this assignment, but each student had a really different approach and a really different sense of what they were interested in, what they approached. So this is also very nice. One of the things, by the way, I want you to notice, I know you're looking at thumbnails of these assignments, but notice that there are usually many very interesting photos on the contact sheet that weren't picked for the final images. So this is another really great successful one. Notice that a couple of these are really almost just about color with just a slight bit of texture. I can actually zoom in and show you some of these reflections. Yeah, I really liked this student's work, and I actually liked some of the things on the contact sheet almost more than the final selections, but I think the final selections were great. This is just looking at the ground. I think this was one of my very favorites. This is a pattern in a sidewalk. And notice how sort of removed it becomes from the actual object. It becomes more about the texture and the color and these wonderful forms jutting in from the side. One of the other things about this kind of work is that you lose, if you're doing it successfully, you lose a sense of both location, direction, and scale. Now this student did not photograph very many objects, but what she did photograph, she photographed very well. So she just picked a handful of items in her own home, got it up very close. Now you might recognize that as a chair end, but you might not have ever looked so closely at that chair end. I love that we can actually see the texture of the sofa itself, of the surface of it, as well as these repeating forms. And this is a combination of being, you know, the texture of the wall or the curtain on which this shadow is falling, but also the shadow and the reflection itself. Flowers, the natural world, they're always a very interesting way to think about abstraction. So we get up close and we're very conscious just of the colors and the forms rather than the whole plant. Now close-ups are an easy way to, or I shouldn't say an easy way, it's kind of a good way to approach this assignment, removing the context, but or just, so close-ups are a good way. because you can simply get up close to an object and it begins to emphasize the texture and the line and the form. But the other part of this is not just about getting close up, and I'll show you an example later that isn't a close-up, but about eliminating context, about framing it so that we can't quite see where that object is attached or where it lives or what its context is. Now, these are all quite successful. You notice that this isn't quite as successful because we see the whole leaves and we are pretty sure we see that that bush is in nature. But these, which are quite separated, this becomes almost like a little microcosm of river. Scale is a really important thing. This kind of disruption of scale, that is how big or how small something is. This could be an airplane view of a riverbed, or it's a tiny crack in the sidewalk. Now this becomes entirely abstracted. We have no idea if we're looking at a wall or a tiny fungus on the ground. It really becomes completely non-objective. Again, I love looking at the contact sheets because they immediately tell me something about the general attractions, whether or not somebody's attracted to cool colors, warm colors, heavy textures, neutrals, saturation, different forms or line. So this becomes very interesting as well. This was one of my big favorites, and it looks almost like an abstract painting, which again is another kind of signifier of this style of photography, which goes really back quite early in the history of photography, but was really brought to the forefront during the same time that abstract painting became very important. Again, yet another sort of generalized, or not, I won't say, and still yet another really nice range of abstract photographs. This student actually was working with a macro lens that she checked out. She was a beginning student. She checked out a macro lens, and most of her abstracts were these extreme close-ups, very shallow depth of field. Now this student, one of their abstracts is not as abstract, but I found it really compelling. So we could kind of see what we're looking at, but the way that this student photographed it, I'm much more conscious of the compositional elements, the color and the form and the kind of interaction of lines in this fuse box, rather than the fact that it is a fuse box. It's more about what the fuse box looks like than what it is. And this is just really lovely. We lose all sense of direction and context. It's almost like we're looking through a grill onto a lunar landscape. Now, this student accidentally threw a very narrative photo in the middle of her abstract. Forgive her for that, because the abstracts are very good. This is not a close-up, and yet this is abstracted because she's framed it off so we don't see the ground, we don't see the ends of the trees. All we're conscious of are these intersecting lines of the branches. Same thing here. It's not that close up, but because of the way she's framed it, we don't see the context. This student definitely likes neutrals. It's not as attracted to bright, shiny colors, and that really makes it so that when you're looking at these, you have to look very close and look at the subtle changes in the texture. These are really interesting. Everything is fair game. Again, really intriguing close-ups that make you go, what are we looking at? What am I seeing? This almost looks like an abstract painting. And this has this really incredible sense of form and line. And still, I'm not absolutely sure what I'm looking at. Again, this photographer only photographed a couple of different objects, which I'd really prefer you do a lot more experimentation, but what he did do with the ones that he photographed was really nice. This was one of my favorites in the whole class. It almost looks like an aerial viewpoint of some kind of alien land. Nice texture. And this student made some really interesting choices. He, whoops, there we go. Oh, actually, I think that is his. Let me, nope, it is not. There we go. So this was one that I really liked. He made this in downtown Davis, and this was a street painting. And you can't, it is not a close-up. We're not getting super, super close up on the wall. He stepped back. He got most of the wall. But because of the way he framed it, it definitely becomes this abstraction. We're not sure what direction we're looking at, how large or how small. It just becomes about the line and form and color. Same thing here. He actually photographed a photograph close up and just gave us a little piece of that photograph, which becomes an amazing abstraction. Couple more. Close-up of feathers and jewelry. Again, the context and the framing. The deep depth or shallow depth of field can actually make something look more narrative, but in these cases, when you get close up and think about your framing, it becomes more abstracted. Christy had this really amazing leaf that she did. That was one of my favorites from this class. She also did this water, which was really interesting, but in this case, I think because of the depth, it lost its sense of being fully abstract. We actually see that we're looking at water from a very sort of predictable viewpoint. And a couple more. Oh, this student really had fun getting very close up, picking up the fibers of, I believe this is his dog's hair, and some water drops, and just a couple more. I can't even remember what these are. I believe they are water drops with this really cool blue light. And this is a banana skin. I do remember that. Really nice choice, really close up. Now you may not have a lens that can get that close up, but experiment and see what you can do. And this is a case with this photographer. Let's go back really quickly. I think that he had stuff on his contact sheet that's a little more interesting than the ones that he showed. They're all good, but he had some great stuff going on that we may not have seen. I think this may be the last one. Yeah, very minimal. It's just a table. Oop, I guess I have one more. I think this is the last one. Yeah, this really interesting shallow depth of field and this bark of a tree. So I hope that gives you some ideas how to incorporate or to examine the world in terms of line, form, space, texture, and color. And have fun, come up with some abstract photographs, and discover the extraordinary in the ordinary.